My stepsister faked a pregnancy to steal the spotlight at my engagement party. But I turned the tables, and what happened next shattered all. I never thought my engagement party would become the stage where I'd expose a professional liar. But sometimes life forces you to become the person you never wanted to be. My name is Charlotte Evans. I'm 29 years old, and I work as an architect designing sustainable homes for young families. Just 4 months ago, Marcus proposed to me on the rooftop of the building I designed, my first solo project, and we decided to celebrate with our families at my childhood home. Everything was perfect, the kind of perfect you see in movies and think only happens to other people. Until my stepsister decided to make it about herself, and I learned exactly how far someone will go for attention. The evening started exactly as I dreamed it would. Our backyard was transformed into something magical, with string lights that Marcus and I had spent 3 weekends hanging from every tree branch and fence post. Mom had made her famous 3-layer lasagna, the one she only brings out for special occasions, and even my stepdad Dave was in an unusually cheerful mood, wearing the tie I'd given him for Father's Day and telling embarrassing stories about my teenage goth phase to anyone who would listen. Marcus looked impossibly handsome in his navy blazer, the one that brings out his eyes, and I felt radiant in the emerald dress I'd been saving in my closet for this exact moment. Everyone I loved was there. College friends who'd driven hours to attend, coworkers who'd become family, neighbors who'd watched me grow up in this very backyard. The guest list was small but meaningful, about 30 people who had shaped my life in important ways. My best friend Sarah from architecture school had flown in from Portland. My mentor Professor Williams had brought his wife and a bottle of champagne from 1995. The year Marcus and I were born. Even Mrs. Henderson from next door was there, the woman who used to give me cookies when I walked home from school, and who taught me that family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up. But then there was Brielle. Brielle Carter, my 26-year-old stepsister, had been acting strange all evening, and in a family where strange behavior was often rewarded with attention, that was saying something. She kept checking her phone every few minutes, glancing at the antique clock on our patio wall, and fidgeting with her wine glass, though I noticed she hadn't actually taken a sip all night. As a freelance influencer with nearly 50,000 followers, Brielle was usually the center of attention at any gathering, posting Instagram stories every few minutes and making sure everyone knew about her latest brand collaboration or spontaneous adventure. She had a talent for making even the most mundane moments seem like content worth consuming, and people were drawn to her energy like moths to a flame. Tonight, though, she seemed different. Nervous in a way that felt calculated rather than anxious, like an actress waiting in the wings for her cue, running through her lines one final time. She kept smoothing down her blonde hair and adjusting her pink sundress, the one that perfectly matched her nail polish and somehow made her look younger than her 26 years. Every few minutes she'd place her hand over her stomach in a gesture that seemed almost practiced, then catch herself and drop her arm back to her side. I should have trusted my instincts right then and there, but it was my engagement party. I was surrounded by love and laughter and the promise of a beautiful future, and I didn't want to believe that someone I'd grown up with, someone who called my mother Mom and had shared countless family dinners and holiday mornings with me, would deliberately try to sabotage the happiest night of my life. The toast was supposed to be simple, intimate, and heartfelt. Marcus stood up around 9 o'clock, when the sun was setting behind our oak tree and casting everything in golden light, and tapped his glass with a fork. The conversation gradually died down as people turned their attention to him, smiling and settling in to hear what he had to say. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began, his voice warm and steady. "When Charlotte and I started dating 3 years ago, I never imagined I'd be lucky enough to not just fall in love with an incredible woman, but to gain a whole family of people who've welcomed me with open arms." He looked around the table, making eye contact with my parents, with my friends, with the people who mattered. "Charlotte makes me want to be a better man every single day, and I'm grateful that you've all supported us and loved us, and shown us what it means to build a life surrounded by people who truly care." Everyone was smiling, reaching for their glasses, and I felt this overwhelming wave of happiness wash over me like warm honey. This was my moment. Our moment. The beginning of everything Marcus and I had planned and dreamed about together. I could see my future stretching out ahead of me. The wedding we'd spend the next year planning, the house we'd buy together, the children we'd raise, the decades of shared memories we'd create. That's when Brielle struck with the precision of a predator who'd been stalking her prey. "Wait, wait!" she called out, jumping to her feet so quickly that her chair scraped against the patio stones with a screech that made everyone wince. "Before we finish the toasts, I have some news too." She placed her hand dramatically over her stomach, the gesture I'd seen her practicing all evening, and beamed at everyone with a smile so bright it could have powered the string lights. "I'm pregnant!" The silence that followed was deafening, the kind of quiet that feels like the world has stopped rotating on its axis. Then came the explosion of congratulations, the squealing, the gasps, the immediate rush of family members jumping up to hug her. Questions flew through the air like confetti. "How far along are you? When did you find out? Have you told the father? Are you excited? How are you feeling?" My engagement party had just become Brielle's pregnancy announcement, and she was absolutely glowing with all the attention now focused entirely on her like a spotlight on a stage. She answered each question with perfect timing, dabbing at tears that seemed to appear on cue, laughing at all the right moments, and basking in the kind of undivided family attention that she'd been craving for as long as I'd known her. I stood there, still holding my champagne glass halfway to my lips, watching as my special day evaporated before my eyes like morning mist. The congratulations that should have been for Marcus and me were now for Brielle and her mystery baby. The photos that should have captured our happiness were now focused on her hand on her stomach, her radiant smile, her moment of triumph. Marcus squeezed my hand under the table, and I could see the frustration in his eyes too. But what could we do? You can't exactly tell someone to stop being pregnant at your engagement party. But this wasn't the first time Brielle had pulled something like this. And as the evening wore on, I found myself remembering a pattern that I'd somehow managed to ignore or forgive in the past. At our cousin Jake's wedding 2 years ago, she'd announced her new business venture right during the reception, pulling out professionally printed business cards and explaining her plan to become a lifestyle blogger to anyone who would listen. At Mom's 55th birthday party last year, she'd chosen that exact moment to reveal she was dating a minor celebrity, a guy who turned out to be an actor from a local car dealership commercial. At Christmas, she'd arrived with a new puppy that she claimed was a rescue but that we later learned she'd bought from a breeder and returned 2 weeks later when she got bored. There was always something, some way to redirect the spotlight back to herself, some announcement or revelation or crisis that required immediate family attention and sympathy. But pregnancy? This felt different, more calculated, more permanent, more cruel. As the evening wore on and everyone fussed over Brielle, asking about due dates and baby names, and whether she hoped for a boy or a girl, I found myself studying her more carefully. She claimed to be 8 weeks along, which would put conception right around the time she'd broken up with her boyfriend Trevor. She said she'd been experiencing morning sickness for the past 2 weeks, but she'd been at wine night with my college friends just last Wednesday, drinking Moscato like it was water and eating spicy Thai food without so much as a queasy expression. She talked about how excited she was to be a mother, but I remembered her reaction when our neighbor's baby had cried during a barbecue last month. She'd actually asked if someone could make it stop and had moved inside to avoid the noise. She mentioned looking at baby clothes online, but Brielle had never shown any interest in children, had never babysat, had never even held our cousin's newborn when he was born last spring. Something wasn't adding up, and the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that my instincts were right. But what kind of person fakes a pregnancy? And more importantly, what kind of person fakes a pregnancy just to steal attention from their sister's engagement party? The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with the wine I'd consumed the night before. Marcus had already left for his Saturday morning run, and I found myself sitting in our kitchen, staring at my coffee and replaying every moment of Brielle's announcement. The more I thought about it, the more details seemed off. While Marcus was in the shower, I decided to do some digging. I started with the basics. When Brielle claimed she'd found out where she'd gotten the test, which doctor she was planning to see, the story she'd told everyone was that she'd suspected something was different about 2 weeks ago, had taken a home pregnancy test that came back positive, and had immediately made an appointment with a doctor to confirm. "Oh, I went to that new clinic on Maple Street," she'd told everyone. Dr. Rodriguez was so sweet and she confirmed everything. "I'm due in early March." One phone call later, I learned that Dr. Rodriguez had been on vacation in Spain for the past month, and according to the receptionist, Brielle Carter wasn't in their system as a patient. She'd never made an appointment, never been seen, never even called to ask about their services. My hands were shaking as I hung up the phone. She was lying. She was actually lying about being pregnant. But why? What could possibly motivate someone to fake something so serious, so life-changing, so sacred to so many people who struggle to conceive? And more importantly, how far was she willing to take this charade? I needed more evidence before I could confront her or tell my parents. I knew that Emma, Brielle's best friend since college, would know the truth if anyone did. Emma and I had always gotten along well. She was quieter than Brielle, more thoughtful, and I suspected she might be feeling uncomfortable about keeping up a lie this big if my suspicions were correct. "Hey Emma," I texted her, "want to grab coffee this afternoon? I feel like we haven't caught up in forever, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about all the excitement from last night." We met at our usual spot downtown, a little cafe called Grind that made the best lavender lattes in the city. I could tell immediately that Emma was on edge. She kept looking around nervously, checking her phone, and barely touched her drink despite usually finishing it within minutes. "So," I said casually, stirring my latte and trying to keep my voice light, "I guess you knew about Brielle's news before the rest of us?" Emma's face went pale, and she set down her cup with trembling hands. "What do you mean?" "The pregnancy. She must have told you first, right? You two tell each other everything, and I know she's been feeling pretty overwhelmed by it all. I just want to make sure she's getting the support she needs." That's when Emma broke down completely. Her composure cracked like an eggshell, and tears started streaming down her cheeks as she looked around the cafe to make sure no one was listening. "Charlotte, I can't keep doing this." She made me promise not to say anything, but this has gone too far. Way too far. "What's gone too far, Emma?" Emma pulled out her phone with trembling hands, her fingers fumbling with the screen as she tried to find what she was looking for. She recorded herself practicing the announcement. She wanted to make sure she sounded believable, that she had all the details straight. "Listen to this." She played a voice memo that made my blood run cold. It was Brielle's voice, but she was talking to herself like she was rehearsing lines for a play, practicing different tones and inflections. "Okay, so I'll wait until right after Marcus finishes his toast. That way it'll have maximum impact and everyone will already be emotional. Then I'll stand up and put my hand on my stomach like this. Oh, and I should mention being 8 weeks along because then I won't be showing yet. But it's far enough that people will think I'm past the risky first trimester. Nobody questions you after 8 weeks." The recording continued for another minute, with Brielle working out the details of her lie like a screenwriter perfecting a script. She discussed which symptoms to claim, how to deflect questions about the father, and even which doctor to name drop to make it sound legitimate. Emma looked like she was about to be sick. "She's been planning this for weeks, Charlotte. Ever since your engagement party got announced on Facebook. She said she was tired of you always being Mom and Dave's favorite, and she wanted to remind everyone that she could have exciting news too. She said you'd hogged the spotlight long enough. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach by someone wearing brass knuckles. She's faking a pregnancy because she was jealous of my engagement party. She bought fake pregnancy tests online, the kind that always show positive results. She's been watching YouTube videos about early pregnancy symptoms so she'd know what to say if anyone asked detailed questions. She even practiced looking nauseous in the mirror and researched which prenatal vitamins to buy so she could leave them lying around where people would see them." Emma was sobbing now, her mascara running in black streaks down her cheeks. I told her this was insane, that she needed to stop before it went too far, but she said it was just to shake things up and that she'd figure out how to handle it later. Later, like my feelings, my special day, my family's emotions. My mother's dreams of becoming a grandmother were all just collateral damage in her attention-seeking scheme. "There's more," Emma whispered, looking around again to make sure we weren't being overheard. "She's already planned how she's going to end it. She's going to fake a miscarriage in about 6 weeks, right around the holidays. She said that way she'll get even more sympathy and attention, and people will feel sorry for her instead of asking questions about why the pregnancy seemed weird." I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process the level of manipulation and cruelty that Brielle was capable of. She wasn't just lying about being pregnant. She was planning to put our family through the devastating grief of losing a grandchild that had never existed in the first place. "Will you help me expose this?" I asked Emma, surprising myself with how calm my voice sounded. Will you help me stop her before she hurts more people? Emma nodded immediately, relief flooding her face. Yes. God, yes. I should have said something weeks ago. I have recordings of her admitting the whole thing is fake. She sent them to me thinking I thought it was funny. I also have screenshots of her online orders for the fake tests and text messages where she talks about her plan. Armed with evidence, I had a choice to make. I could confront Brielle privately and give her a chance to come clean on her own, potentially saving her some embarrassment, but risking that she'd simply find a way to spin the situation, or convince my parents that I was lying. I could tell my parents quietly and let them handle it, but that would put them in the terrible position of having to confront their daughter with evidence of her deception. Or I could do what Brielle had done to me, make it public and dramatic, exposing her lies in front of the same people she'd lied to in the first place. 3 days after my engagement party, Brielle had already started posting about her pregnancy journey on Instagram. She'd bought a fake sonogram picture online, a grainy black and white image that could have been anyone's ultrasound, and posted it with the caption, "Can't wait to meet you, little one, first ultrasound and everything looks perfect. Hashtag blessed mama. Hashtag new chapter. Hashtag pregnancy journey 8 weeks strong." The post had hundreds of likes and dozens of congratulatory comments from followers, friends, and even distant relatives who'd seen the news. She'd also started a pregnancy blog, complete with weekly updates about her symptoms and cravings. She'd written an entire post about the emotional journey of finding out she was going to be a mother, full of stock photos of pregnancy tests and baby shoes that she'd clearly stolen from other websites. That's when I decided she'd gone too far to be handled quietly or gently. I called a family dinner for that Sunday, telling everyone I had something important to share about our wedding planning process. Mom made her Sunday pot roast, the one that takes 6 hours and fills the whole house with the smell of rosemary and garlic. Dave opened a bottle of wine from the collection he'd been saving for special occasions. And Brielle showed up glowing and talking about how she'd already started looking at baby furniture online and researching the best preschools in the area. She'd even brought a folder full of printed articles about pregnancy nutrition and parenting philosophy, spreading them out on the coffee table like evidence of her commitment to motherhood. She talked about morning sickness she wasn't experiencing, doctor's appointments she'd never made, and plans for a nursery in the apartment she'd probably have to move out of when she couldn't afford the rent. Actually, I said, standing up after we'd finished eating and Dave had cleared the dishes, before we talk about wedding planning, I need to address something serious. Brielle looked puzzled, tilting her head in that way she'd perfected for her Instagram photos. What's wrong, Charlotte? You look upset. I am upset, Brielle. I'm upset because I know you're lying. The room went dead silent. Mom's hand froze halfway to her wine glass, and Dave stopped mid-motion as he was putting dishes in the dishwasher. The only sound was the tick of the grandfather clock in our hallway, counting off the seconds like a countdown to an explosion. What are you talking about? Brielle's voice had gone up an octave, taking on the high, breathy quality it got when she was nervous or caught off guard. I pulled out my phone and set it on the table where everyone could see it. I'm talking about the fact that you're not pregnant. You never were pregnant. And I have proof. Charlotte, what are you doing? Mom looked horrified, her face pale and her eyes darting between Brielle and me like she was watching a tennis match. I'm doing what I should have done 3 days ago. I pressed play on Emma's recording. Brielle's own voice filled the room, tinny and clear through my phone's speaker. God, it was so easy to fool them all. You should have seen Charlotte's face when I announced it. She looked like she wanted to disappear. Mission accomplished, right? I mean, I know it's a little crazy, but I ordered these fake pregnancy tests online, and they look totally real. I even practiced looking nauseous in the bathroom mirror before the party. The key is to make it seem like you're trying not to make a big deal about it, you know? Like you're being humble about it but you can't contain your excitement. The silence that followed was crushing, thick and heavy like the air before a thunderstorm. Mom stared at Brielle in disbelief, her face cycling through confusion, hurt, and betrayal. Dave looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds, his shoulders sagging under the weight of what he was hearing. Brielle? Mom's voice was barely a whisper, fragile and broken. Please tell me this isn't real. Please tell me you didn't actually do this. Brielle's face had gone completely white, all the artificial glow draining out of it like water from a broken glass. She looked around the table desperately, Like she was searching for an escape route that didn't exist, some way to take back the words that were still echoing in the room. I can explain what? I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins like fire. Explain how you called Dr. Rodriguez's office and claimed to be a patient when you've never even been there? Explain how you've been posting fake sonogram pictures on Instagram and starting a pregnancy blog based on lies? Explain how you decided to fake a pregnancy just to steal attention from my engagement party? It wasn't supposed to go this far. Brielle finally exploded, tears streaming down her face, but I could see the anger beneath the tears, anger at being caught, not remorse for what she'd done. I was tired of always being in the background. Charlotte gets engaged, Charlotte buys a house, Charlotte gets promoted at work, Charlotte gets praised for her designs. What about me? When do I get to be the center of attention for once? When do I get to have good news that makes people excited? So you faked a pregnancy? Dave's voice was ice cold, colder than I'd ever heard it. You lied to your mother, to your family, to hundreds of people online because you were jealous? I was going to figure out how to end it, Brielle sobbed, her carefully constructed facade finally cracking completely. Maybe say I had a miscarriage in a few weeks or something. I just wanted one moment where everyone was excited about my life, instead of always focusing on Charlotte's perfect everything. The words hit Mom like a physical blow. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, and walked outside without saying a word. Through the window I could see her standing in the garden she'd spent 20 years cultivating, her shoulders shaking as she cried for the grandchild she'd thought was coming, and for the daughter who'd manipulated her love so cruelly. Dave followed her after a moment, leaving Marcus, Brielle, and me alone at the table with the wreckage of what used to be our family dinner. Brielle, Marcus said quietly, and I could hear the disappointment in his voice. Do you understand what you've done? Not just to Charlotte, but to your parents. Your mom has been calling her sister every day to talk about becoming a grandmother. She's been researching baby gear and looking up parenting books at the library. She started knitting a blanket. Brielle just kept crying, but I could see something else in her eyes now. Not just shame, but resentment. Like somehow, we were the ones being unreasonable for not understanding her need for attention. I think you need to leave, I said firmly. Go home, delete those Instagram posts, figure out how you're going to make this right. But Brielle wasn't done. As she gathered her purse and the folder of fake pregnancy information, she turned back to me with a look of pure spite that I'd never seen on her face before. You know what, Charlotte? At least now everyone knows what you're really like. So controlling, so perfect, always has to be the victim. Maybe Marcus should know what he's really signing up for, a wife who can't stand it when anyone else gets attention. That's when Marcus stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Actually, Brielle, what I'm signing up for is a life with someone who doesn't manipulate her family for Instagram likes. Someone who doesn't lie about being pregnant to steal attention from other people's special moments. Charlotte didn't ruin your life, you did that all by yourself. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of consequences that Brielle clearly hadn't anticipated when she'd cooked up her scheme in a desperate bid for attention and sympathy. Mom was devastated, but not just because of the lie itself. She was heartbroken because she realized how desperate for attention her daughter had become, and how she'd somehow missed the warning signs. She blamed herself, wondering if she'd somehow favored me over Brielle without realizing it, if she'd failed as a mother by not recognizing how much pain Brielle was in. Dave was furious in a way I'd never seen before. He'd always been proud of Brielle's social media success, bragging to his coworkers about his daughter, the influencer who made money posting photos of her perfectly curated life. But now he saw it for what it really was, a desperate need for validation that had spiraled completely out of control. He told Brielle that if she wanted to live like an adult, making adult decisions to lie and manipulate people, then she could support herself like an adult too. He cut off her credit card, stopped paying her phone bill, and told her she had 1 month to find her own place. The Instagram fallout was swift and brutal. Someone had screenshot Brielle's pregnancy posts before she could delete them. And when word got out that it was all fake, her followers turned on her with the kind of mob mentality that the internet does so well. Comments flooded in calling her everything from pathetic to psychotic to disgusting. Her direct messages filled with angry messages from women who'd struggled with infertility, who'd lost babies, who'd gone through the real pain that Brielle had been faking for attention. Brands started dropping her partnerships immediately. The clothing company that had been featuring her in their campaign pulled her photos and issued a statement distancing themselves from her. The wellness brand that had been sending her free supplements terminated their contract. The makeup company that had been considering her for a collaboration decided to go in a different direction. Emma, feeling guilty about her role in keeping the secret for as long as she had, posted her own statement on social media explaining what had happened and apologizing to everyone who had been deceived. She also cut ties with Brielle completely, saying she couldn't be friends with someone who would exploit something as serious as pregnancy for attention. But the most devastating consequence was watching Mom try to process what had happened. She kept asking herself what she'd done wrong, how she'd failed as a parent, whether she'd somehow driven Brielle to this kind of desperate behavior. She stopped sleeping well, started questioning every interaction she'd had with both of us growing up, wondering if she'd somehow created the competitive dynamic that had led to this moment. "It's not your fault," I told her one afternoon, as we sat in her kitchen, drinking tea and watching the rain streak down the windows. "You didn't make her do this. You loved us both equally, and if Brielle couldn't see that, that's on her, not you." "But maybe I did favor you without realizing it," Mom said, her voice small and broken. "Maybe I talked about your achievements more. Or maybe I seemed more proud of your stability compared to her social media career. Maybe I made her feel like she had to compete with you for my love. Mom, look at me." I took her hands in mine, hands that had comforted me through scraped knees and broken hearts and every disappointment of my childhood. Brielle made a choice. She chose to lie, to manipulate, to hurt people for attention. That's not because you weren't a good enough mother. That's because she has issues that have nothing to do with how you raised her. It took weeks for Mom to start believing that. But gradually, with the help of a therapist Dave convinced her to see, she began to understand that Brielle's behavior was about Brielle's insecurities and choices, not about any failure on her part as a parent. Meanwhile, Brielle had moved in with a friend from college and was working at a retail job to pay rent. The first time in years she'd had a traditional job instead of relying on social media income and family support. She tried reaching out to me once, sending a long text message that was equal parts apology and justification for what she'd done. "I know what I did was wrong, but you have to understand how hard it is to always be the mess-up while you're the golden child. I just wanted one moment where I was the one with good news for once. I never meant for it to hurt Mom and Dave so much. I thought I could handle it better, but everything got out of control so fast. I'm sorry, but I hope you can understand why I felt like I had to do something to get noticed." I read the message 3 times before I responded, taking time to choose my words carefully. "Brielle, I understand that you felt overlooked, but what you did wasn't just about getting attention. You exploited one of the most sacred things, the idea of new life, of becoming a parent. You made Mom cry tears of joy for a grandchild that didn't exist. You made me feel like my happiness didn't matter. You planned to put our family through the grief of a fake miscarriage. That's not just wanting attention, that's cruel. And until you can acknowledge that without making excuses, I don't think we have anything to talk about." She never responded to that message, and I heard through mutual friends that she was telling people we'd overreacted to her harmless prank. 6 months later, Marcus and I had our real wedding, a small, intimate ceremony with the people who truly mattered to us. We'd learned through the whole ordeal who our real family was, who could be trusted with our happiness, and who deserved a place in our future together. Mom walked me down the aisle, radiant in her navy blue dress, and Dave officiated since he'd gotten ordained online just for the occasion. Emma was there, having become a closer friend through the whole experience, and even some of our extended family, who had been hurt by Brielle's deception, came to celebrate with us. Professor Williams gave a speech about the importance of building your life on a foundation of truth and trust. Mrs. Henderson from next door brought homemade cookies for the reception. Brielle wasn't invited. She'd made no effort to make genuine amends, take real responsibility for her actions, or repair the relationships she'd damaged. We'd heard through mutual friends that she was still trying to rebuild her social media presence, this time with a vulnerability and growth angle, posting about learning from mistakes and the importance of authenticity. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Some people might think that excluding her from the wedding was harsh, but I'd learned something important through this whole experience. Protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's necessary. Enabling toxic behavior by pretending it's acceptable doesn't help anyone, least of all the person engaging in that behavior. The morning after our wedding, As Marcus and I sat on our hotel balcony drinking coffee and watching the sunrise over the mountains, I thought about how different my life looked now compared to 6 months ago. I'd learned to set boundaries, to trust my instincts, and to not feel guilty for refusing to enable toxic behavior just because it came from family. "Do you ever regret exposing her like that?" Marcus asked, as if he could read my thoughts. I considered the question seriously, turning it over in my mind like a stone. "No," I said finally. "I regret that it had to happen at all. I regret that she put me in that position. But I don't regret refusing to be complicit in her lie. She made a choice to hurt people for attention, and choices have consequences. Even family? Especially family. The people closest to us have the power to hurt us the most, which means they also have the biggest responsibility to treat us with respect and honesty." As I write this, nearly a year has passed since that disastrous engagement party that changed everything. Mom has healed from the betrayal, though she's more cautious now about taking things at face value and has learned to see the warning signs of manipulation that she'd missed before. Dave has started going to therapy to work through his feelings about Brielle's behavior and his role as a stepfather. Marcus and I are settled into married life, stronger than ever after weathering that storm together and learning that we can trust each other completely even in the most difficult circumstances. And Brielle? Last I heard, she was still trying to rebuild her social media presence, but with limited success. The pregnancy scandal had damaged her reputation too severely, and people were wary of trusting someone who'd proven capable of such elaborate deception. She'd moved to a different city, ostensibly for a fresh start, but I suspected it was more about escaping the consequences of her actions. But I've learned not to spend energy thinking about her choices or her consequences. I've learned that you can love someone and still refuse to let them damage your life. I've learned that exposing lies isn't cruel. It's necessary for everyone involved. And most importantly, I've learned that my happiness isn't something I need to apologize for or diminish to make other people comfortable. Some people are meant to be in your life forever, and some people are meant to teach you lessons about boundaries and self-respect. Brielle taught me that it's not my job to manage other people's emotions or enable their destructive behavior, even if they're family. She taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone's dysfunction. That lesson was worth more than any attention she could have stolen from my engagement party. Because at the end of the day, the people who truly love you don't need to tear you down to build themselves up. They celebrate your joy, support your dreams, and show up honestly to the moments that matter. I'm grateful for that clarity, even if it came at such a painful price. Sometimes the most important lessons come wrapped in the most difficult packages, and sometimes protecting your own happiness means having the courage to call out the lies that threaten it. I learned that I don't need to shrink myself to make room for someone else's insecurities, and I don't need to feel guilty for refusing to participate in someone else's drama. My peace of mind, my marriage, and my relationships with the people who truly care about me are worth more than keeping up the pretense that toxic behavior is acceptable just because it comes from family. That's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. And it's a gift that came disguised as the worst night of my life. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are also the ones who teach us the most about who we really are and what we're willing to accept in our lives.